All right, guys, let's continue with 30 big blinds, and you will see the same patterns here. Of course, now we're a little bit deeper, so we have to be careful shoving all these suited Broadway hands. But you see, for 30 bigs, shoving Jack, Queen 10 suited, King 10 suited is pretty standard. And if you check that in Hold'em Resource Calculator, you will see that it's just printing a ton of money, because it really benefits from making your opponent fold a lot of ace-x, and you still have reasonable equity. We mix in some flats with aces and kings, also with ace-queen suited. So here, of course, 3-betting would be profitable, but then you will get a problem with your overall range, because you want to do a lot of flatting. As you can see, the green hands, those are the hands we play call fold, so it means we call and we fold to a squeeze. We have a few 3-bet folds, and that also means that we're gonna do less 3-betting. Yes, of course, you can also play a wider 3-betting strategy. So you call a few less hands and you 3-bet more hands as a bluff and for value. That will be totally okay, but you are going to defend your button tighter overall. And as you know from playing small blind versus big blind, playing a strategy that consists of a higher VPIP frequency in general is always better for the EV. So here we want to play more hands. Our theory advocates to play more hands. Thus, we also have to take into consideration that we should have some stronger hands on our flanking range, because otherwise we would be very susceptible against squeezes, right? If we just 3-bet 10s plus and ace jack plus or 9s plus every single time, we pretty much squeeze folding 90 to 100% of the time. So if we mix in some traps with aces, kings, ace queen suited, we still have ace jack suited, king queen suited. We're continuing against the squeeze, also the occasional ace jack and ace 10, ace 9, ace 8 suited. And this is the same as we had with 20 big blinds. If the blinds are nits, do not proceed again, or do not continue against the squeeze. Just call and then fold against the squeeze. Just so you know, in theory, against a good opponent, you are supposed to defend those hands. Otherwise, as you can see, because we are folding a bunch of hands against the squeeze. However, use your brain. If the blinds are very nitty and passive, and you're probably you're not afraid to face a lot of squeeze, then you can play a very exploitive strategy. That means still flatting a bunch of hands, and also 3-betting aces and kings, because you don't need to balance your range anymore. All right. So always knowing when to follow a more game theoretical fundamental approach, and also knowing when to follow a more exploitative approach is key here. And it's important to take tiny tendencies into account, because we never know 100% what our opponents are up to. So yeah, that's it for button versus cutoff. Button versus MP, you have the same. Now the ranges are getting a little tighter. Same should be here. 8-7s we call, and we also continue against the squeeze. We now also shove less hands. Why? Because our opponent's range is tighter, so the EV of jamming a hand like King 10 suited or Queen 10 suited would drop tremendously, even though it's still profitable. But flatting now becomes much better, because the raise fold gap of our opponent is much smaller, and if we get called, we probably have even less equity, because from MP he will call less hands than from cutoff. But however, his raise fold gap will probably slightly smaller, so take that into consideration. So we're just shoving the blue hands. We now also want to do more 3-betting, because we can shove less hands. We have more hands that want to do 3-betting, and instead of just reshoving or flatting. However, we flat call a few traps here, queens plus and ace jack suited, 50% of the time with the premium pocket pairs. And yeah, we continue with king queen suited. Very important, the brown ones. You only continue when the preflop aggressor has folded. When he called, you fold those hands. You're not calling ace 10 suited. The equity you have is not good enough against the squeeze and the call because the preflop aggressor, he knows so we play 30 big blinds against him. If he calls a squeeze, his range is mostly ace queen ace jack type of hands. He's not defending ace 9 or ace 8 suited, let's say he's not supposed to. Some ace queens and some traps and the occasional king queen king jack suited and maybe strong pairs. You perform really bad with ace 10 suited and you don't have the deepness anymore to leverage the implied odds you have when hitting a good hand. So you end up investing your money too often with too little equity. So we just go ahead and fold. But if the preflop aggressor folds, we only play against a squeezing range, which still consists of a few bluffs, suited aces, some suited broadways, of course the premium hands, but it's still strong enough. If you think your opponent is very aggressive, then you can also shove those hands. That's totally fine, but you can always call. Button versus under the gun. Now you see the same here. We're not shoving anything. We mostly call, play 3-bet fold or 3-bet call. Nothing so spectacular. And you also can see that we fold some of these pairs. If, same spiel here, if the blinds are passive, you can call the pocket pair. Because the problem is that if we end up calling all these suited aces and the pairs, we're very susceptible against squeezes. And this is something you need to understand. It's not minus EV to flat call these hands per se, but it's going to get minus EV if your opponents follow a good strategy from the blinds. That means squeezing the right amount of hands, and then they will just make more money against you because you have more folds in your range. So this is the threshold where we start folding ace-6 suited, ace-3, ace-2 suited, and pocket deuces. So reduce our call fold gap. And as you can see, our called fold gap in terms of calling and then folding against the squeeze is still very, very high. However, if it gets ridiculously high, you're losing too much money. This is a frequency where your opponents cannot exploit you unless you defend those hands. And by the way, I also incorporated ace-9 suited and king-jack suited as a fold. In theory, it's a thin defend. So if you're not sure here with ace-9 suited or king-jack suited, you think you play against a very strong opponent that is aggressive, then ace-9 suited, king-jack suited would be reasonable defense as well. But here, as exploited against the population tendency, ace-9 suited, king-jack suited, we should always fold. Especially with 30 big blinds, we're going to get better spots. Small versus button. Now here you can see we do a ton of reshoving. Fives and deuces is something you will see in the rejamming ranges as reshove all day long. Frankly, I would say we should always reshove those hands, but the EV is very, very close. So I wouldn't mind reshoving those hands. But calling is also fine. And the reason is mainly that we also have a few sets in our range post flop. But yeah, as I said, it's really whatever. The EVs are relatively close against a big blind that knows how to play and a button that has the proper strategy, meaning that he's playing somewhat close to our 30 big blind range. Then we should always follow this approach here. If you see that your opponent is opening too wide, high fold to 3-bet, or even big blind is a calling station, so he's even over defending his big blind, then you can also just go ahead and reshove those hands. Other than that, oh sorry, this one here. So yeah, we're flatting Jack 10 off, and you see we do a bunch of flatting. King 5 suited and King 6 suited, Jack 8 suited, which I think a lot of people are just folding. The off-suited hands, off-suited aces, some of these are very, very suitable hands to bluff 3-bet with. And against squeezes, same here as with 20 big blinds, we're pretty much not really not able to continue properly. It's something that button has to take care of, so we only continue with ace 10 off against the squeeze and ace 9 and ace 8 suited. So as you can see, we're very susceptible against squeezes, but that's in theory totally okay. That's something button has to be aware of, and so as a side note, if you're the big blind and you play around 30 big blinds, you should do a ton of squeezing, because most players are not aware of that, and most players have a very susceptible small blind range, which is in theory totally okay, but buttons are not aware that small blind cannot defend properly, thus he should defend according to GTO. So that means that if people are thinking, oh, well, also small blind is going to defend against a squeeze, which barely is going to happen, then it's your job to defend according to the squeezes. Don't worry, I'm also planning to add a few of those ranges, how to react in certain weird situations. So let's say calling against squeezes as a preflop aggressor. A little bit more exceptional spots, which not happen that often, especially with these awkward stack sizes, how we should behave in those situations. But I will do that once I have finished the module open raising and flatting 3-betting. I mean, flatting 3-betting is done. Open raising here, status quo is that I finished 20, 30 big blinds. I will also add 40 big blinds, 50 big blinds, 75 big blinds, and 100 big blinds. And I will also abandon these kind of like, what are we going to do with 40 to 100 big blinds? No, only specific stack sizes. Small versus cutoff, it just then gets a little tighter and tighter. I would probably, if the big blind is a fish, I would be flatting the blue hands, king jack. However, I would be shoving 9s, 8s, 7s almost always. And yeah, the suited broadways, I would be flat if the big blind is a fish. So these are adjustments you always have to make, and 3-bet folds are pretty standard. The spots you can also study in a way where you go to the 30 big blind, look at cutoff, what is his opening range, 35%. Look at what he's check what he's supposed to defend against 3-bet, find out the ratio. So let's say he's supposed to defend 50%, and if his fold to 3-bet is more than 50%, then you start adding more bluff 3-bets here. You 3-bet more suited aces, more of these queen 9, jack 9 type of hands, 9-8 suited, 8-7 suited type of hands. If the guy is, let's say, folding 30-40% less than he's supposed to, don't worry, he's already losing a ton of money against your range anyway, because look at the hands you're squeezing with, at 3-betting with, they're extremely strong. So I wouldn't go any tighter. Maybe instead of ace-5, ace-6 suited, I would be bluffs 3-betting with ace-10 and ace-9 suited, and just try to even have stronger bluffs. But yeah, I think it's also totally fine just to stick to your range. Because if we also want to have those flats in our flatting range, but probably I think it's better if someone is barely folding against 3-bets, just have very strong bluffs. Or you don't need to have bluffs at all. That's also totally fine. And you just 3-bet your value hands. Small versus MP, same procedure here as well. As you can see, versus squeezes, it's really hard to continue here. These hands here, ace jack, ace 10s and 7s, we're supposed to go broke always. So let's say we call and big blind re-raises and MP calls, we should now call or go all in. Or if PFR folds, we also call or go all in. This is, I mean, you guys know it from your own experience. These are very, very individual spots. Some players heavily under bluff, some people heavily over bluff. I will definitely play some spots where I fold ace jack, ace 10 suited 7s 100% of the time. So I don't have any hands. I'm continuing against a squeeze. And then there are spots where I'm even 5-bet jam or 4-bet jamming ace 4 suited, because I know big blind is heavily over bluffing and squeezing way too many hands. And there's so much dead money in the middle that I need so little fold equity to make it a profitable play. Something where I also want to encourage you to start thinking more on your own, be more in-game aware, try always to check your opponent's stats, tendencies, and so on and so forth to make the best decision possible. Small versus under the gun, you can see still we're defending relatively wide, mixing in some 3 or 4 with ace 10 off, and just shoving 9s plus. We're shoving some of these jack 10, king 10 suited, and you can check those in Hold'em Resource Calculator. You will see that these are always very, very profitable. And given the fold equity have and equity against the calling range, overall a very profitable reshove. Let's go to cutoff versus hijack. Yeah, not so much to say. I mean, ace-10, ace-6 suited are going to be the hands we defend against squeezes. And the gray ones here, king-queen suited. We want to shove some king-queen suited for 30 bigs, and sometimes we want to call. Versus MP, actually, I'm a bit surprised why we should be calling. I remember fours is against both ranges, very, very marginal. So here I left it out. Here I took it in. I mean, yeah, you can either ways call or fold. I'm gonna take it out. So basically, all these break-even pre-flop flats I did not consider, or I marked them as half. Because they're close, and we should only occasionally mix in some calls. So you know where the thresholds are and the bottom ends of our range. Cutoff versus under the gun. And here, by the way, also the squeezes, they always, that's very, very important. Glad that I didn't forget. The squeezes are always against late position. So let's say it's always button or cutoff. So a late position squeezing range, right? So you have to take into consideration, let's say we open raise under the gun, someone open raise under the gun and we flat from MP. That hijack squeezes, then we have to be even tighter than that, okay? And leave out eights and ace-10 suited and king-jack suited, only continue with nines and ace-jack suited, okay? And that's very, very important. Cutoff versus under the gun, you see now it gets tighter and tighter. We only flat the suited broadways and ace-jack and king-queen, mixing some bluff through it with ace-10 off. This is what we had here already for the 20 big blinds range. Here the UTG 1 versus UTG alternative. This is basically the same principle that we play a 3-bet only strategy. Now it's really 3-bet only, and we can play a 3-bet only strategy because we're a little deeper. Now we're 30 bigs. But you can also play a quote-unquote normal strategy, but I think both are very, very powerful. And for example, if under the gun open raises a ton and also doesn't like to fold against 3-bet, 3-bets a lot, I would like to rather go for this approach and just 3-bet extremely strong. But if we also implement call, we can call more hands, right? Every single time you invest less into the pot, you can play more hands. I mean, you can see here we play 3-bet only strategy, so we have to play a few hands less. But here, now we can also add queen-jack suited, pocket eights, ace-9 suited as 3-bet folds. We 3-bet broke tens plus for 30 bigs, and the green ones are call and fold. And here you can see king-queen suited is a call and fold. It's indeed extremely, extremely marginal, and actually most of the time minus EV when you call and face a squeeze. You should be folding this hand. Keep in mind, someone open raise from under the gun, you flat from MP. So both ranges are actually really, really strong. So in theory, the squeezer, wherever he squeezes from, his range should be relatively strong. The amount of times he wakes up with aces or kings or ace-king trump the amount of times when he's supposed to have a bluff. He's supposed to have very little bluffs, and probably even his bluffs should be ace-jack off or ace-10 off, and even against those hands. So we're not really crushing their bluffing range at all. And we're also way too short, so we just fold those hands. So actually in terms of the preflop range, it's very defined, very easy to remember. And here we have the same UTG 1 versus UTG 3-bet only. Just so you guys know, I think it's almost the same. Yeah, MP should be here for nines. I think this is just a bug. I'm going to change that. I'm going to go all of them, try to fix those small little bugs. And you can see that it's pretty much the same range. I think the only difference is that a king-10 suited is slightly less plus EV than from MP, but we can pretty much 3-bet play the same range. UTG 1 versus UTG. You see here now we're trapping more often. Makes a lot of sense because more players are left to act. And if we face a squeeze and we just call tens or nines, we go broke. However, same procedure here. If someone squeezes from MP, because this is only for late position, if someone squeezes from MP, I would be folding nines. And if a really tight player squeezes from MP, I would be even folding tens. Let's go to big blind versus small blind. Now you see the major difference here is that we 3-bet nines, tens, jacks, queens, because of course now we're deeper and we want to start building a pot, right? With 20 big blinds, we call. If we choose the right sizings, we're gonna get it all in by the river anyway. Usually you want to be bluff 3-betting with a lot of suited hands. However, here we mainly bluff 3-bet those high card hands that still are able to flop some decent top pairs, block some of our opponents' value hands. However, I really don't mind squeezing bluff 3-betting suited connectors. You have to consider the following. Theory tells you what to do in certain spots, right? Makes sense. So here it tells us, okay, go ahead and bluff 3-bet queen 7 off, bluff 3-bet king 4 off, because it assumes that villain plays a certain strategy. And in this scenario, it means that villain is 4-betting certain hands or has a certain 4-bet shoving frequency. However, this is very unrealistic in theory. In practice, sorry. Most players have a smaller 4-bet frequency, so we should be looking for more suited hands. And you will also see that in some of my other ranges, but big blind versus button, where I still advise to 3-bet more playable hands. Here we have the positional advantage, we're quite short, and we have a ton of fold equity preflop. So these are the only exceptional spots where I would say, okay, it's okay to follow theory and to 3-bet those hands, because we just mix them in to balance our range. In 3-bet folding a hand like 7-5 suited in position would be just a waste of equity. Because if your opponent starts applying the right 4-bet frequencies, you are actually losing money because you're 3-bet folding hands that have way too much EV in terms of calling, and you just waste your EV. So yeah, we actually mix in some calls with 7 and 8, just reshove deuces to 6s. Here there's no shame. Don't be afraid playing those hands in position. It against a polarized open raising range, the EV of calling 8s and 7s is higher than reshoving. Anyway, reshoving is printing a ton as well, but calling prints more money, right? So we always want to aim for the highest EV possible. And yeah, remember against the min raise we call any 2, and against the 2.5x we increase our calling range by the purple hands. And in order to not be exploitable, because if we just shove deuces to 6s, our opponent could be raised calling with jack 10 suited. So we mix in also some ace 10s, ace jacks, and ace queen offs. Yeah, but if you play against someone, you have some extreme reads on him, some tendencies, he doesn't like to fold to 3-bets at all, then I would just go ahead and pick more playable hands as a bluff 3-bet, or even increase my value 3-betting range to even 8s and ace 9 suited and king queen off and ace jack off, and just bluff less in general and wake up with more stronger hands on average against this specific opponent. Let's take a look at big blind versus button. This is what I mean here. We're out of position. Here's where I say, okay, we're in position. I'm okay with 3-betting those hands. But here you see theory would say you 3-bet king 6 off, queen 6 off, queen 7 off, king 5 off. And if you are studying with those solver tools, you will see that's different than theory, because I believe if you check the population tendencies, And also, if you just use your experience, you will see that people never ever 4-bet shove the hands they're supposed to shove. I mean, I think they're supposed to shove king jack suited type of hands, king 10 suited type of hands, a lot of suited hands, which they usually just call. So that means we're going to see the flop more often in a 3-bet pot. That means we're going to play more out of position in a 3-bet pot. That means you want to have more playable hands. And instead of having those hands, I would prefer having those hands. And also some king 5, king 4 suited. It's just much easier to play. You either hit a draw or a decent pair or not. Or you on many boards, like let's say the board is king deuce deuce, we just c-bet once and then we're done with the hand. Right? On those non-hitting boards where our opponent is very likely to miss, we just bet once and give up. Maybe we step if we think he has a step on the turn once again, or if you think he has a lot of ace highs. So it's very easy to play. And you have more playability, and yeah, you also have board coverage on lower boards, which, okay, frankly, is not that important with 30 big blinds, but it plays a little role here as well. So all in all, I think it's a much better strategy against the population than 3-betting these queen 7 off and king 6 offs and queen 5 offs. Let's go see against big blind versus cutoff. You see here, same procedure. I think theory wants us to 3-bet hands like king 9 off and king 7 off. These type of hands, which I'm not a big fan of. And also theory wants us to 3-bet some offsuited aces, which I think makes a lot of sense. Because now I don't mind playing a 3-bet pot with an offsuited ace. It's just we have more equity. Now we have reached a hand category where I agree and say, yes, okay, that makes sense as a bluff 3-bet, because decent amount of the time we're going to hit an ace. It also really benefits from folding out all these a6, a7, ace8, ace9 off type of hands, where you over-realize your equity pre-flop with those hands. So that's totally okay to mix in some offsuited aces. Of course, they're a little bit more difficult to play than the suited aces, but now it has reached a hand category where I say, yes, it's all right. That in terms of raw equity, it's strong enough to play a 3-bet pot against also the whole population plays. If someone says, "No, Ben, I really don't feel comfortable. I just call." Okay, I will lose a little bit of EV because I always just call. Here with those hands of 3-betting, I just 3-bet 5-4 suited, 8-5 or a suited king. That's okay. Check the frequencies, so your frequencies are not getting out of line. I mean, there are tons of hands you can choose to bluff 3-bet with if your opponent is over folding 3-bet suited kings, 3-bet more of the off-suited aces. You can even start 3-betting hands like 7-6 off. I mean, if a guy has 4 to 3-bet higher than 55% from the cutoff, you should be 3-betting a ton against him anyway. Against hijack, I mean, you can look over it. Nothing so spectacular here. Versus MP, you see also the tighter the ranges become, our hands get always a little stronger, our suited connectors get a little stronger. And versus UTG, it looks like this.